Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Welcome to Norse Studies Week 1. This video is quite a change of pace from my other video series because this isn't about teaching or offering up opinions that I've already thought through and really put to the test. It's more about exploration and sharing what I'm learning as I go along. And I have several reasons for sharing this process. The first is just to reassure any new pagan seekers or pagans who have also had a shift in their spiritual lives that this is perfectly normal and it's okay to go through it, and it's not a reflection that you have fallen short in some way. The second is that I hope by sharing my journey, it will put me into contact with other people who are at a similar spiritual stage or who share my spiritual trajectory. It always helps to have the mutual support of like-minded people who share your priorities. And third, and this is by far the most selfish reason, this is to make sure that I stay on track. It's a way of me keeping myself accountable and making sure that I follow through with this. Up until now, my foray into Norse spirituality has been pretty haphazard, touch scatterbrained, and altogether random. So it's time to take a more structured approach. This week, I'll be sharing some highlights from a book I've been studying. I'll be contrasting 3 how to get started in Norse paganism videos, delve into what I got out of a video about Norse witchcraft, and also another video and what I gleaned from Jackson Crawford's introduction to Norse mythology. I will have links in the description box below to the book and the channels, to absolutely every person and channel I reference here today. These won't be the only sources that I consult on my journey, of course, but these are all people who I think are worth listening to and entertaining their opinions. So the book I've been studying is called Heathen Handbook. It's credited to Woden's Folk Kindred. It's the 4th edition, copyright 2012, and this is my second time going through it. My first was back in May, June, somewhere around there. But thus far, it has been my favorite book that I've read on Norse spirituality and practice, and this time I'm going through it much more slowly. When I began my pagan journey, I was looking at Wicca, witchcraft, all forms of paganism, and I was just gorging on books and information. And I soon discovered that I wasn't necessarily retaining all of the information, letting alone allowing myself time to let it sink in, think about it. So I'm trying to avoid previous mistakes. So here's hoping that's successful. So in the book, I've reread Introductions and Roots in History and the section on Basic Beliefs. One statement that the authors made that I really appreciate is, quote, "Sincerity and common sense are the benchmarks we guide ourselves by," end quote. This grounded approach on spirituality and focusing on the person actually having the right motivation is incredibly refreshing. I am fed up to the back teeth, as many of you will probably be aware, with the people who seek out knowledge only so they can regurgitate facts later on in order to look impressive to other people. They don't have understanding, they have no wisdom, they can't give you any kind of pointers about practical application, they don't really share their own personal experience, and frequently they display no manners of any description. So, had enough of that for sure. And I do think that one of the jobs of any religion or any kind of spiritual pursuit is to provide guidance for people to build up their own character and to learn how to treat other people decently. And without that as kind of the core and the center of things, I think we've completely missed the point of the exercise. And I also think that it does reflect on the gods when a religion that they inspired produces people who are inclined to being practical and genuine. So that initial quote from the book, that did make me, from the get-go, feel like I was probably on more solid ground than I was with other publications I have examined. Now, the section on beliefs focused on the connection of the people to the gods, to each other, and that one of the necessary tasks in life is to do one's personal part in ensuring that all of that carries forward into the future. This is a point worthy of considerable thought because we are living in an age in which people are atomized, which is different from individualism. Individualism is about knowing who you are, making decisions, forging a path in life. It's about cultivating voluntary relationships and cooperating through negotiation rather than force. But atomization is detachment. It's a lack of connection to others and even a lack of knowledge about your own true nature. It's about not knowing how to create relationships, and this makes people susceptible to external control because they have created no structure for themselves. They don't have any particular standards. They're just floating around. So the first time they meet up against a hard concrete object, they're going to start conforming to it. So I think that is a real serious danger that probably warrants further thought and discussion. And another thing is that obligation, responsibility, duty, these have become very dirty words in our culture, partly because of those who have abused such concepts in the past, whether we're talking about organizations, governments, religions, or just very powerful, influential, and heavy-handed individuals. People have misused such ideas and they've used it for their own benefit rather than more of a generalized, this just makes us better people kind of benefit. And another reason why we don't like those words anymore is because of the Peter Pan syndrome, in which no one wants to grow up. But as pagans, we've got to acknowledge and accept that we are all links in the chain. We didn't begin the chain, we won't be the end of it, and therefore we should be doing our part while we are that link in the chain, and we should be passing down a worthwhile legacy. Another point in this section that deserves particular mention is the emphasis that the authors place on actions, that actions outweigh what we say and believe. We are our deeds. I believe that was exactly how they phrased it in the book. I mean, just imagine if just the change we would see in society, if that principle was taken seriously and acted upon on a cultural level, if that was just the norm. I mean, it would be rather startling to see what would result from that. And the reason why what people do is so important is because the doing is the final manifestation of reality. And magical practitioners in particular understand this. It's part of our training. We know that all things begin with thought. That thought is directed by words and is finally manifested into being through the doing. And what is done is the most accurate reflection of what is truly within someone's mind, heart, and spirit. And people fight against this idea probably because they wouldn't bear up well under an examination of their deeds, or they think that hiding themselves somehow makes them powerful and better off and aloof and mysterious and all that nonsense. So just some food for thought. Now on to the videos. This week I watched How to Become a Norse Pagan / Heathen from the channel The Widom of Odin, and Beginner's Tips for Norse Paganism, Heathens, Never Before Heard Answers from the channel Norse Magic and Beliefs, and Where to Start with Paganism from the channel Dutch Pagans. Widom of Odin laid things out quite simplistically, that to be a heathen is to worship heathen gods. The definition is in the doing, which fits in neatly with the principles discussed in the book I just referenced. He also talked about the Gragas laws of Iceland. The full quote of the law was, "A man worships heathen beings when he assigns his property to anyone but God." And with God in this meaning the God of Abraham, obviously showing that these laws were written from the Christian perspective. And to assign property is to sacrifice too. So if one were to go out in nature, hail the gods, the spirits of the lands, and the ancestors, thank them for the benefit of their presence in the world, and give them an offering, then one is a practicing pagan or heathen. Then on Norse magic and beliefs, he shared three main tips. The first was don't believe what any and everyone says. Do your own research. Find out for yourself, which perfectly sound. I think that's good life advice just in general, but it takes on a special importance when we come to spiritual explorations. His second idea was to come to Norse paganism with fresh eyes, if at all possible. Don't try to fit it into the worldview or the context of another religion. Don't bring in assumptions of what you think it should be. Find out what it actually is and then go from there, which I think that's perfectly fair. And then he suggested focusing less on the gods and more on land spirits and ancestors. Now, considering that the whole reason I even began this journey into Norse spirituality had everything to do with the god Loki encouraging me to do so and encouraging me to know the other gods, I don't think this is the most practical tip for me. And that being said, making sure to incorporate veneration for land spirits and ancestors is extremely important as well. I see these as three prongs that all must be attended to in order to have a well-balanced approach. But forgetting the gods as if they're uninterested and too remote and can't be bothered. I don't know what his relationship with the gods is, but that has not been reflective of my own experience, and certainly is not reflective of my experience with Loki, who is very hands-on when it comes to giving direction. So I don't think that was the most helpful tip. I'm not sure that I really agree with that entirely. Now, on the channel Dutch Pagans, the gentleman there expressed the view that human beings are naturally born pagan. It's only when we're taught something contrary and, it's instilled in us that we must believe that it's true, that's the part when we start to drift away from our inherent paganism. And he bases this idea on how children interact with the natural world, how tuned in they are when they're left to their own devices. And oftentimes children can't articulate this sense of connection. I mean, they're just too young. They don't have the capacity to really process that, let alone express it, but they feel it, they act on it, and that's a significant clue. And, okay, I think that is very fair. He also says that he thinks humans overcomplicate things in general, which I am forced to concur on this particular point. I am frequently guilty of doing just that. There have been many times in my life when if I wasn't making something complicated or needlessly difficult in some way, that somehow my brain translated that as if I wasn't actually trying. I needed to suffer in order to know that I had tried and that I was at least attempting to do things correctly. It's a really distorted perception and way of looking at things, and it has required time and consistent effort to correct that. But as with most things, it is ongoing, this deprogramming from unbeneficial ways of thinking. And the third thing the host suggested was getting out into nature, as in a lot more, and finding a spot out somewhere, all of your own, visiting there as often as possible, and just sitting there and learning to listen again. Not just to the sounds around you, although that is important, but learning to listen to the energies of the place. He stressed that magic occurs every day and it is within everything, which is perfectly true. And he made a point of emphasizing that the earth is sacred and there's beauty in that sacredness. So I thought, good, worthwhile things there. Next up is a discovery of Nordic witchcraft by the YouTuber Freyja Norling. The video I watched was Season 1, Episode 1, entitled The Scandinavian Black Books and the Seidr. First, Freyja explains that the so-called black books were actually individually owned books of magic and sorcery in which practitioners recorded their knowledge and their personal notes. It was never intended for outside use or publication. It was strictly for their own benefit, like a journal. It really was that personal. And then she said that the word Seidr has a dual meaning. The first was magic and the second was fish. I was previously completely unaware that Seidr could be translated as fish. I don't know if this has any esoteric significance. Freyja didn't indicate that it does, but I know from previous studies into Norse spirituality that we do have the well of Mimir, and that's connected to wisdom. Wells, of course, are filled with water. Fish swim through water. So if we curly Q our way around, the fish meaning of the word Seidr could speak to the magical side of things. But again, that is a curly Q journey. Now, of course, any discussion of Seidr isn't complete without the mentioning the goddess Freyja, and she's the one who brought this kind of magic to the Aesir. The presenter Freyja called her the mistress of this magic. And interestingly, the presenter Freyja, which I'm having to use the presenter Freyja and the goddess Freyja so that we can be clear about who we're talking to. Bit inconvenient that they share a name. But the presenter Freyja said that she considered Loki to be the masculine counterpart to the goddess Freyja in Seidr magic, that they represent all aspects of fertility between themselves and magically create a harmony in between them. Now, that being said, the presenter Freyja did acknowledge that seeing Loki in this light is controversial. Boy, is it ever. But a controversy involving Loki? Heavens to Betsy, say it isn't so. But what she's saying, it does make absolute sense to me. I have always associated with him with magic instinctively just because of his capacity for transformation. That is magical in and of itself. And he and the goddess Freyja both have creative and destructive aspects. They're both uncompromising in their own way, willful, independent. And these are the traits of witches and wizards everywhere. So the presenter Freyja went on to say that Seidr requires acceptance. I think she used the word radical acceptance, even the ability to let go, to stop endlessly wishing, and to quiet the inner chatter of your mind and surrender to the flow of all the energy that is around you. This is a really fascinating idea to me because, as much as magic is an act of will, it is also subject to what is actually possible. So, letting go of illusions of things that cannot be, that makes room for what can and what ought to be, and magical practitioners operate within that space. And the final point of her video that really stuck with me was what Freyja said about living in the company of death. Life and death are complementary states, neither exists without the other, but being consciously aware of it, accepting it, and not fighting the emotions surrounding either state of being, that's a different matter altogether. So I'm going to be meditating on that a lot in the coming days. Finally, I watched Dr. Jackson Crawford's video, Introduction to Norse Mythology. I could tell straight away that he is a very experienced teacher. He unloaded a great deal of information in just 25 minutes, all of it very organized, didn't overwhelm the brain. I hope that as I watch more of his videos and I study just the manner of his presentation, that it will actually help me improve my own skills in that area. But that is a side issue. Dr. Crawford briefly explained what versions of the names of gods and places he was using and why, as well as the sounds associated with characters that aren't in the English alphabet. So I made special notation of that because my pronunciation of Norse names and all that, it leaves much to be desired. It really does. And I'm not expecting to make rapid progress, but if I can make gradual progress on that, I think that that will be helpful. Then Dr. Crawford explained what the source material of this mythos is. Obviously, he talked about the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, as well as Guttrek Saga, the Saga of the Volsung, Skaldic poems, Saxo Grammaticus, Adam of Bremen, Tacitus, picture stones, rune stones, amulets, idols, and place names. And after that, he gave a brief overview of the main figures of Norse mythology. Of course, we have the Aesir, the Vanir, and the Jotun, who were giants. These were essentially competing tribes, but the Aesir and the Jotun were forever getting into conflicts with each other. Dr. Crawford noted that the giants are not a different species from the other gods, they just happen to belong to a different group. The cosmology of Norse mythology, of course, involves Yggdrasil connecting all the nine worlds, which translates as realms or enclosures. And he said that these are not to be viewed as different planets, but rather just different localities that are home to certain peoples. Dr. Crawford says that we don't fully know what each of these nine realms are, and that theories vary, which is completely consistent with what I've been hearing from other sources. Briefly, he went through the Norse creation myth and how Ymir came to life through fire melting ice and the Ginnungagap. Gap. Oh, see, I'm going to work on my pronunciation. Be patient with me. But this gap is the primordial void. That was how he described it. And of course, it was the slaying and the refashioning of Ymir's remains that created all that is, including Midgard, our realm, our enclosure. And then he went on to mention the first humans were Askar and Embla. And of course, the whole kit and caboodle goes kablooey at Ragnarok when all the gods are fighting each other. And that once the dust settles, then the world is reborn. And to finish up, Dr. Crawford outlined core values that he has discovered within this mythos: a sense of fatalism, that some things are predetermined, the importance of hospitality and having an upstanding character, and magic. So this is the substance of what I've studied about this week. Next week, I'm going to be taking a closer look at the Norse creation myth and just listen to different interpretations of it, because people do have their own takes, and I think it'd be interesting to compare and contrast them and just kind of see where my own headspace is with it at this moment. It could be a different headspace a year from now, but we are going as we are going. And then I'm also going to get deeper into the Discovery of Nordic Witchcraft series by Freyja Norling. She has a lot to teach. I really like her approach, so I'm anxious to improve myself there. Now, if you are also exploring Norse spirituality, I would love to compare notes with you. The best place to get a hold of me is on the Gilded server. It's called Blackbird's Brew, and the link is in the description box. It'll be underneath all the other links to my sources I referenced today. If you go to the Blackbird's Brew on Gilded, under the Pantheons and Tradition category, click on that, and then you'll see a drop down of channels within it, and you will find the Norse Germanic Spirituality channel. We could start up a conversation there, or you could just DM me. We could even set up a time to do a voice chat where we could just talk about what we're learning and where it's taking us on our journey. I have found that there's nothing like a good conversation to help clarify the thinking. So if you're of a similar mindset, I would really enjoy talking to you. But that about does it. We've gone on for nearly 20 minutes. We'll see how this series progresses. I hope you'll be back next week. But bye for now.